Have you ever signed a loan for a house or a car and just wondered how it all really works under the hood? Well, today we're diving into a really wild legal theory, and a controversial one at that, which claims we've been looking at the whole idea of debt completely backwards. And it all hinges on a law from the Great Depression that, believe it or not, some argue never actually ended.
Okay, let's just jump right in with a question that's going to sound, well, pretty out there. But it's the entire foundation of the argument we're looking at. What if that promissory note you signed wasn't about creating a debt, but was actually the payment itself? What if the deal was settled, paid in full the second you put pen to paper?
So, right here, this slide just nails the core of the whole thing. On the left, you've got what we all know and live by. You sign a note, you get cash, and now you owe that money back with interest. Simple. But on the right, that's where this theory takes a sharp turn. It says your signed note is a valuable asset. The bank isn't lending you anything, it's buying your valuable note, and the cash you get is just the payment.
Okay, so how in the world could anyone even make an argument like that? Well, the entire foundation, the whole thing, rests on a series of events that kicked off way back during the Great Depression.
So back in 1933, things were bad. I mean, height of the Great Depression, bad. President Roosevelt declares a national banking emergency, which gives the government all these new powers to try and fix the economy. Now, here's where it gets weird. Fast forward 40 years to 1973, and a Senate report actually confirms that this emergency proclamation is still technically extant, active. And the core of this whole argument today is that because a very specific off switch was never flipped, we are all still legally operating under this 1933 state of emergency.
And look, this is the exact text from the law itself that this whole theory hangs on. It's pretty clear. These powers only end after the president has declared by proclamation that the emergency has terminated. Proponents of this argument say, point blank, that exact proclamation has never been made.
Okay, so if we go along with this for a second, if we accept the premise that this old law is still active, what does that actually mean for, a mortgage you signed today?
Well, this is the next really big jump in the logic here. The whole idea is to completely recategorize what a promissory note is. It's not just a simple contract, a fancy IOU. No, the theory claims that under the rules of that 1933 Act, it becomes a formal statutory security. It's suddenly in the same league as things like stocks or bonds.
So where do they get this idea from? Well, it comes straight from the text of that 1933 Act. See, to get money flowing again, the law created what proponents of this theory call a congressional family of financial instruments that could be used as security to back new cash. And what's right there at the top of the list? Notes.
And people who believe this theory, they point to this quote from the congressional record from the very day the law was passed, and they see it as the smoking gun. They argue that Congress's real intent was for your note not to be a debt, but to be the actual security that allows a bank to get brand new money issued from the Federal Reserve. So if your note is a security, then what happens next? How does this transaction supposedly work? The argument is, it's not a loan at all. It's an exchange, one asset for another asset of the exact same value.
The key financial term you got to know here is at par. It just means an exchange at face value. So, if you sign a promissory note for, say, $300,000, this theory argues the bank has to treat it as an asset worth exactly $300,000 the moment you sign it. It's not a promise of future money, it's an asset with real present-day value.
This chart here, it basically maps out the whole process they're describing. Step 1, you sign the note. Step 2, the bank deposits it as what's called eligible paper. Step 3, the Fed accepts it at par for its full face value. Step 4, new currency is then issued, backed by your note, and given to the bank, which then gives it to you. And that's it. According to this theory, the transaction is done. You exchanged your valuable note for cash. The debt is settled.
And advocates for this theory will point you directly to this chunk of U.S. law as proof. They read this line, collateral security shall not be less than the amount of Federal Reserve notes, to mean the exchange has to be 1 for 1. Your note's value has to equal the cash value, no wiggle room.
Okay, so that's the theory. But how does this stack up against, the real world? The way courts and banks actually operate every single day? Well, as you can probably guess, it creates a massive legal clash. It sets up a fight between two totally different ways of defining what a promissory note even is.
And this table here really breaks down that legal fight. On one side, you have the standard the courts use. It comes from a big Supreme Court case, and it's a general test for what counts as a security. But on the other side, you've got this 1933 law,
a very specific act of Congress defining instruments for one very specific purpose, backing currency. The whole claim is that the specific law from Congress should automatically override the general test from the courts.
And this brings us right back to the beginning, the single point that this entire argument hinges on. Everything we've talked about, the note has an asset, the at-par exchange, it's all built on the idea that a 1933 emergency law is still in effect. If that foundation is shaky, the whole thing comes crashing down. And it's really important to point out that, to date, no U.S. court has ever bought this foundational premise in a real loan dispute.
So let's just quickly recap the whole theory. An unended state of emergency from 1933 supposedly redefines your promissory note as a valuable security. That security is then exchanged at face value to create new money, which, according to this argument, means your obligation is satisfied the moment you sign.
So while this particular legal theory gets consistently shot down in court, it does leave us with a really fascinating question, doesn't it? What's the real power of a law that might be on the books but is almost completely outside of our common knowledge? It's a heck of a reminder that even for something as normal as a loan, there can be these hidden histories and radical ideas just waiting to be explored. It makes you wonder, what other big assumptions do we just take for granted every day?